Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm about to take you on a journey through truths that many refuse to see and stories that powerful voices try to silence. What if I told you that beneath the headlines and the noise, there's a quiet storm gathering, one that threatens to shake the very foundations of a nation many believed untouchable? This isn't just speculation or fear-mongering. These are clear signs, undeniable and unfolding right before our eyes. Stay with me as we uncover the hidden fractures, the rising tensions, and the unexpected cracks that reveal a reality far more fragile than anyone wants to admit. By the end of this, you won't just see the news, you'll understand the story behind the story. So lean in, because what I'm about to share will challenge everything you thought you knew. Israel's political system is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. For years, the country has prided itself on being a beacon of democracy in the Middle East, but recent years have exposed deep fractures in that image. Multiple elections held within short spans of time, an inability to form stable coalitions, and fierce ideological divisions have paralyzed the government. The political machinery isn't functioning the way a stable state should. In less than 5 years, Israel has gone through repeated cycles of elections, each one failing to deliver long-term stability. This is not the rhythm of a healthy democracy. It's the symptom of internal implosion. The very leaders who claim to protect democracy are now accused of undermining it. When the government proposed sweeping judicial reforms that would limit the powers of the Supreme Court, hundreds of thousands of Israelis took to the streets. It wasn't just a protest. It was a roar of desperation from a population watching its institutions decay. Families, workers, former generals, tech leaders, they all marched in fear that Israel was slipping into authoritarian. For the first time, reservists from elite army units publicly refused to serve, not because of enemy threats, but because they no longer trusted the system they swore to defend. This chaos is not limited to legal or political circles. There's a growing civil war in ideology. On one side, you have the ultra-Orthodox and nationalist right wing pushing a vision of religious statehood, dominance, and expansionism. On the other side, there's the liberal secular class, fearful of losing their freedoms and deeply disillusioned by rising racism, extremism, and corruption. These two factions no longer speak the same language politically or culturally. The center has all but collapsed. Israeli society is no longer just polarized, it's fragmented beyond repair. Young Israelis are increasingly questioning the future of the state itself. They're not asking how to fix the system, they're wondering if it can be fixed at all. The power struggle is also visible in how decisions are made. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, once hailed as a master political strategist, is now viewed by many as the man steering the ship toward the rocks. He is currently under trial for corruption, even as he clings to power through coalitions with extremist factions. Many Israelis believe he's lost the moral and political legitimacy to govern. His alliance with hard-right religious figures has only deepened the sense of crisis. These aren't leaders building unity, they're flamethrowers fueling chaos, and the people see it. The anger is not just in the opposition anymore. It's inside the military, the judiciary, the media, and the general public. Every sector feels betrayed. Every group feels cornered. This political turmoil comes at a time when Israel faces unprecedented global scrutiny. Instead of presenting a unified front, the country is falling apart from the inside, and its enemies are watching. They know that no matter how powerful a country's army is, it cannot win a war when its people are divided, disillusioned, and distrustful of their own leaders. Internal conflict is the disease no nation wants to admit it has. But Israel can no longer hide it. Its political chaos is not just a momentary glitch, it's a deep structural unraveling that is being televised, tweeted, and exposed on the world stage every single day. What once was carefully contained is now spilling out into the open. The mask has fallen, and beneath it is a country at war with itself. Israel's diplomatic position in the world is shifting, and not in its favor. For decades, it enjoyed nearly unconditional support from powerful allies like the United States and several European nations. That support translated into financial aid, military cooperation, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic cover in international forums. But today, something has changed. The global community is beginning to see past the narrative that once shielded Israel from criticism. The images coming out of Gaza, the reports from human rights organizations, and the voices of millions of ordinary people around the world are painting a very different picture. This shift isn't being driven by governments alone. It's being pushed by the people, young people, students, influencers, journalists, and activists are flooding the streets and social media platforms with demands for justice and accountability. Universities in the West are seeing mass protests. Politicians are being forced to answer uncomfortable questions. Celebrities are breaking their silence. The global mood is no longer sympathetic, it's outraged. The European Union, which once remained cautiously supportive, is now openly debating sanctions, cutting aid, and reviewing arms deals. In some countries, Israeli ambassadors are being summoned to explain war crimes and civilian casualties. Even the United Nations, often dismissed by Israeli leaders, has stepped up its condemnation with resolutions and inquiry. And what's shocking is that this isn't just the voice of traditional opponents. Many of these statements are coming from Israel's historic allies. France, Spain, Ireland, Belgium, countries that once treaded carefully are now taking bold stands. What changed is not just geopolitics, but public perception. And once the people turn, politicians are forced to follow. The United States, Israel's closest ally, is also feeling the heat. While American presidents have long pledged unwavering support, the younger generation of Americans doesn't share that sentiment. Members of Congress are speaking out. Some are even calling for a reevaluation of military aid. And in cities across the U.S., people are holding massive demonstrations, not just against war, but against the very idea that their tax money is supporting it. The idea that criticizing Israel is political suicide is beginning to fade. When the shield of global silence breaks, so does the protection it provides. And Israel is beginning to experience that reality. Countries in the global south have also become more vocal. Nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America are increasingly aligning their foreign policy with the voice of their people rather than the pressure of Western powers. South Africa took Israel to the International Court of Justice. Malaysia has openly condemned Israeli operations. Turkey, despite years of fluctuating relations, is back in a position of fierce opposition. The Abraham Accords, once seen as a breakthrough, now look shaky as Arab populations exert pressure on their governments to withdraw or reconsider normalization. This decline in global support has strategic consequences. Military superiority alone doesn't guarantee victory if a nation becomes isolated. Diplomatic isolation means fewer trade agreements, limited technological cooperation, and restricted access to global forums. It means weakened influence at the UN and other institutions. It means when conflicts erupt, fewer nations are willing to back you, vote with you, or defend you on the world stage. And more importantly, it means being held accountable. War crimes investigations, sanctions, Arms embargoes, these are no longer distant possibilities. They are being openly discussed. The truth is, Israel's long-standing impunity is being challenged like never before. The days when the world would look away are coming to an end. The veil has lifted. The public is informed, connected, and empowered. The same technology Israel once relied on for defense is now being used against its narrative. Every bombed hospital, every displaced child, every live-streamed airstrike adds fuel to a fire that can no longer be ignored. The world isn't blind anymore. And Israel's diplomatic fortress is no longer impenetrable. Internally, Israel is facing a crisis unlike anything it has seen in recent decades. The divisions within its own society are growing deeper and more volatile. What was once a largely unified state under a shared narrative is now being torn apart by ideological, political, and religious rifts. On the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, protests erupt weekly, not against foreign enemies, but against the government itself. The Israeli public is deeply split over Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership, especially his judicial overhaul plan, which has triggered massive demonstrations for over a year. Tens of thousands of Israelis, young and old, religious and secular, left and right, have taken to the streets, blocking highways, defying police orders, and demanding change. These protests are not isolated. They represent a nation struggling with its identity and questioning its future. The judiciary, once a pillar of stability, has become a battleground. Netanyahu's plan to weaken the Supreme Court has caused outrage not only among opposition parties, but also among former military chiefs, legal experts, and tech industry leaders. Many believe this move threatens the very fabric of Israeli democracy. When retired generals and Air Force pilots begin speaking out against the government, it signals something profound, a loss of trust in the institutions that once unified the country. Reservists from elite military units are refusing to show up for duty, a development unheard of in a country that prides itself on its military readiness. This isn't just political theater. This is a breakdown of cohesion in a society built on national service and collective defense. At the same time, religious tensions are intensifying. Ultra-Orthodox and secular Jews are clashing over military exemptions, education policy, and the role of religion in the state. The ultra-Orthodox population, growing rapidly, demands subsidies and exemptions, which secular Israelis are increasingly unwilling to support. The resentment is growing on both sides. This friction creates a ticking time bomb that affects governance, taxation, and national unity. The more the state tries to appease one group, the more it alienates another. What emerges is a state constantly at war with itself, caught between modernity and tradition, liberalism and fundamentalism, nationalism and democracy. On top of that, the economic engine of Israel, once fueled by its high-tech sector, is slowing down. The political instability and proposed judicial changes have spooked investors. International tech companies are reconsidering their positions. Venture capital is pulling back. Startups are relocating. The Startup Nation brand is beginning to tarnish under the weight of uncertainty. Young, educated Israelis are talking about emigration. Absolutely, they're questioning whether their country offers them a stable and free future. This is brain drain in real time, and it threatens Israel's competitive edge on the global stage. Arab Israelis, who make up about 20% of the population, continue to face discrimination and systemic inequality. They live in underfunded towns, suffer from limited access to education and healthcare, and are often viewed with suspicion by the rest of society. These grievances are festering. The events in Gaza and the West Bank only deepen the divisions within Israel's borders. Tensions in mixed cities like Lod, Haifa, and Jaffa flare up with every escalation in violence. The threat of internal unrest isn't theoretical. It has happened before, and it can happen again with even greater force. The cracks in Israeli society are no longer hidden. They're on full display in the Knesset, in the media, and on the streets. A country that once prided itself on resilience and unity is now grappling with identity, ideology, and survival. This internal fragmentation is more dangerous than any external enemy because it strikes at the heart of national solidarity. A divided house cannot stand. And right now, Israel is a house with widening cracks, weakening foundations, and no clear blueprint for repair. Regionally, Israel's geopolitical position has become increasingly precarious as it faces growing isolation in the Middle East. Once confident in its strategic partnerships and military superiority, Israel is now encountering a shift in regional dynamics that is far more threatening than any conventional war. The Abraham Accords, once hailed as a breakthrough in Arab-Israeli relations, are showing signs of strain. Countries like the UAE and Bahrain, which had normalized ties with Israel, are now rethinking the depth of their cooperation, especially in the wake of Israel's continued aggression in Gaza and the West Bank. What was once seen as a bold diplomatic step toward peace and prosperity is now clouded with hesitation and public backlash in the Arab world. These states are increasingly forced to balance political alliances with mounting pressure from their populations, who remain sympathetic to the Palestinian cause and disillusioned by Israel's repeated military offensives. Even Egypt and Jordan, nations that have long-standing peace treaties with Israel, are walking a tightrope. Their governments face widespread public anger every time violence escalates in Gaza or Al-Aqsa Mosque is desecrated. Though diplomatic channels remain open, the warmth is gone. Intelligence cooperation and security agreements continue, but the political cost of being seen as close to Israel is rising. These nations cannot ignore the powerful wave of public opinion that grows louder with each civilian casualty, each demolished home, each televised funeral of a Palestinian child. This regional tension has created a new reality. Israel may have treaties on paper, but in the hearts of the people across the Arab world, the distance is only growing wider. Furthermore, resistance movements across the region are gaining strength and coordination. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and even factions within the West Bank are no longer operating in isolation. With increased support from Iran and other sympathetic actors, they have upgraded their tactics, technologies, and networks. Drones, cyber attacks, precision rockets, these are no longer tools used exclusively by state armies. They are now in the hands of groups that have declared open resistance to Israeli occupation and aggression. This means Israel's doctrine of overwhelming force is no longer sufficient. Its enemies are learning, adapting, and growing more fearless, while its deterrent capability is being questioned like never before. The Gaza War of 2023 was a wake-up call. Despite Israel's technological edge, the Iron Dome's performance showed limitations. Rockets flooded the skies, cities faced lockdowns, and the psychological impact on Israeli citizens was immense. What's more alarming is that these rocket barrages came not from a state military, but from an impoverished and besieged enclave. The question many are now asking, both within and outside of Israel, is if a blockaded territory can bring a nation to a standstill, what happens when the threat is coordinated across multiple fronts? In the broader Muslim world, the sentiment is shifting too. Where once there was division, now there is unity, at least in the cause of resisting occupation and injustice. Turkey, Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia, these countries are becoming more vocal. Boycotts of Israeli products, public rallies, and calls for diplomatic isolation are gaining traction. The Israeli narrative of self-defense is no longer unchallenged on the world stage. In global forums, from the UN to the ICC, Israel now finds itself facing resolutions, condemnations, and calls for accountability that cannot be ignored forever. Its image as the victim has eroded. Its portrayal as the aggressor is becoming mainstream. As regional unity against Israel builds, and as diplomatic allies start showing discomfort, Israel's ability to act unilaterally is diminishing. The world is no longer silent. The Arab street is no longer asleep. The myth of Israel's invincibility is cracking under the weight of regional resistance and geopolitical fatigue. Its neighbors are no longer scared. They are watching, coordinating, and preparing. And that shift, more than any war, has the power to bring Israel's dominance to its knees. On the international stage, Israel's image and standing have faced increasing challenges that reflect broader shifts in global geopolitics and public opinion. Once shielded by strong alliances and a dominant narrative of security and survival, Israel now finds itself confronted with mounting criticism, diplomatic setbacks, and a complex web of international pressure that cannot be dismissed. The unwavering support from traditional allies, particularly the United States, is no longer as absolute or uncomplicated as it once was. While the U.S. remains a critical partner, there are growing voices within American political circles, human rights organizations, and civil society that question Israel's policies, especially regarding settlements, military operations in Palestinian territories, and the treatment of civilians. This nuanced stance has begun to influence how other nations perceive and interact with Israel. Europe in particular has been vocal in expressing concern over Israel's actions. The European Union has repeatedly condemned settlement expansion and called for renewed negotiations toward a two-state solution. This has led to diplomatic tensions, trade debates, and increased calls for accountability in international forums. Countries like France, Germany, and Sweden have imposed restrictions or are considering measures against products originating from disputed territories. This growing skepticism from Europe signals a shift away from automatic political support and toward a more critical, balanced approach that weighs human rights and international law alongside security concerns. Global public opinion has also played a powerful role. Social media and digital platforms have amplified Palestinian voices, bringing the realities of occupation and conflict into the eyes of millions worldwide. Images and videos of violence, displacement, and protest circulate rapidly, influencing public discourse and shaping attitudes toward Israel. The rise of grassroots movements, academic boycotts, and cultural campaigns like BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, have challenged Israel's legitimacy in ways that traditional diplomacy cannot easily counter. These movements have found traction not only among activists, but also among students, artists, and even former diplomats, creating a broad coalition that questions Israel's policies and calls for change. International organizations and courts have increasingly scrutinized Israel's actions. The International Criminal Court, ICC, has opened investigations into alleged war crimes in Palestinian territories, signaling that legal accountability may no longer be avoidable. While Israel disputes the court's jurisdiction and intentions, The very fact that these processes are underway highlights a changing international environment. The message is clear. Actions taken under the banner of security are subject to international norms and consequences. This challenges Israel's long-standing approach of operating with relative impunity in contested areas. Economic pressures are also mounting. Some multinational corporations have begun withdrawing investments or severing ties with Israeli businesses linked to settlements or the military. The tech sector, a cornerstone of Israel's economy, faces increasing scrutiny from global partners concerned about ethical implications. This economic dimension adds another layer of vulnerability to Israel's position, as it depends heavily on foreign investment and trade. As the international community's expectations evolve, Israel's ability to maintain its economic dynamism faces new tests. Diplomatically, Israel is becoming more isolated. Its efforts to form new alliances, while still significant, often come with conditions and are viewed through a lens of skepticism. Countries that once courted Israel for strategic gains now weigh the costs carefully, mindful of domestic public opinion and regional sensitivities. Israel's attempts to expand influence in Asia, Africa, and Latin America meet mixed responses, as many nations seek to balance relations with both Israel and the Arab world. This balancing act limits Israel's freedom to maneuver and complicates its foreign policy objectives. The cumulative effect of these international pressures is profound. Israel's global image is no longer that of an unchallenged power with unquestioned legitimacy. Instead, it faces a world increasingly willing to criticize, challenge, and hold it accountable. This transformation alters how Israel can operate internationally, affects its strategic options, and raises serious questions about its long-term security and diplomatic future. The old equations no longer apply, and Israel must confront a reality where it can no longer rely solely on military might or historical alliances to secure its position. Inside Israel, internal divisions and social unrest have become increasingly visible, revealing cracks in what once appeared as a unified society. The country's complex demographic landscape, composed of Jews from diverse backgrounds, Arabs, Druze, Bedouins, and other minority groups, has always presented challenges. But recent years have seen these differences escalate into open conflict and polarization. Political fragmentation is at an all-time high, with frequent government collapses, coalition crises, and protests reflecting deep disagreements over the country's direction, values, and policies. The question of how to deal with the Palestinian issue, the role of religion in the state, and economic disparities have fueled tensions that ripple across the nation's social fabric. The ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, for instance, has become a significant political force, pushing for policies that some see as undermining democratic principles and civil rights. Their opposition to mandatory military service for their youth, demands for expanded religious influence in public life, and resistance to gender equality measures have triggered widespread debates and protests among secular Israelis. These internal cultural clashes feed into a larger struggle over identity and the future vision of the state, dividing Israelis along ideological and religious lines more sharply than ever before. Moreover, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, who make up about 20% of the population, often feel marginalized and discriminated against. Despite having citizenship rights, many experience systemic inequalities in education, employment, housing, and political representation. This fuels grievances and alienation, which sometimes manifest in protests and clashes with security forces. These tensions add to the overall atmosphere of instability, undermining social cohesion and trust within Israeli society. Economic inequality is another critical source of unrest. While Israel has a thriving tech sector and growing economy, wealth distribution remains uneven. Many communities, including Arab Israelis and residents of peripheral areas, face poverty and lack access to quality services. This economic disparity creates fertile ground for social discontent, further challenging the government's ability to maintain internal stability. Protests over the high cost of living and housing crises have erupted periodically, reflecting widespread frustration among ordinary citizens struggling to make ends meet. The rise of nationalist and far-right groups has also exacerbated divisions. These factions often promote aggressive policies toward Palestinians and minorities, stoking fear and hatred. Their influence in government and society has led to increased incidents of hate crimes, violence, and rhetoric that threaten the fragile peace between communities. Radicalization complicates efforts toward reconciliation and peaceful coexistence, pushing Israel further into isolation, not just externally, but internally as well. Youth in Israel, like their counterparts worldwide, are increasingly disillusioned. Many are skeptical of political leaders and institutions, frustrated by the ongoing conflict and lack of progress toward peace. The mental health crisis among Israeli youth, exacerbated by years of living under security threats, lockdowns, and military conscription pressures, is a growing concern. This generational discontent hints at deeper societal challenges that will shape Israel's future for decades to come. Additionally, protests and public demonstrations have become a regular feature of Israeli life. From anti-government rallies to social justice movements, these events highlight a population that is divided and restless. The government's response has sometimes been heavy-handed, leading to accusations of police brutality and suppression of dissent, which only deepen the sense of alienation among many citizens. This cycle of protest and repression undermines the democratic principles Israel claims to uphold. In the end, these internal challenges pose a significant threat to Israel's stability. A society fractured by religious, ethnic, economic, and political fault lines struggles to present a united front, weakening its ability to respond effectively to external threats. The growing discord inside the country not only destabilizes governance, but also erodes the social trust essential for long-term peace and prosperity. Without addressing these internal fissures, Israel's future as a cohesive and resilient nation remains uncertain. As we reflect on these 11 undeniable signs pointing to Israel's precarious position, it becomes clear that the challenges are not just external, but deeply internal, shaking the very foundations of the state. From rising dissent within its borders to the shifting sands of international alliances, the picture painted is one of a nation at a crossroads, grappling with its identity, its policies, and its future. The complexities are immense and the outcomes uncertain, but what remains certain is that no power remains invincible forever. History teaches us that when a nation fails to address its internal divisions and loses the trust of the global community, its days of unquestioned dominance are numbered. To every listener who has journeyed with me through this truth, I leave you with this. Awareness is the first step toward change. Understanding the forces at play helps us better grasp the fragile balance in global politics and the human stories behind the headlines. Whether you watch from near or far, these signs should inspire us to think deeply, question boldly, and seek peace with wisdom and courage. Good luck on your path of knowledge and understanding. Thank you for your attention, your open minds, and your willingness to face reality with honesty and strength. May this insight serve not only as information, but as a call to deeper reflection and meaningful dialogue.